Today, we're talking about the heart of Project Swallowtail, the block ambassadors that make the entire project alive and breathe and have a heart. And today, we're going to be hearing from a couple of incredibly dedicated and knowledgeable and just all around superstars in the block ambassador world. But I want to give you a snapshot of who the block ambassadors are in the first place. So the block ambassadors are the central part of the Project Swallowtail model. They are essentially the reason that Project Swallowtail can continue, hopefully, into perpetuity, because the idea is to empower the people in communities who are already doing this work or are very much inclined to and might just need some resources and a bit of nudging and some help. And we have had a resounding amount of success with this because we've got a grand total of 97 block ambassadors. This is as of, I'm realizing, 2 weeks ago, so it's possible that others have signed up, and we have almost 100 now. So there are 82 ambassadors that are within the original project area. So that was Southwest Toronto, the Parkdale, High Park, and greater region, going up to Soren Market, over to St. Anne's Anglican Church, southeast to Ontario Place, just about, and bordering Etobicoke on the west side. And 15 block ambassadors, however, are spread well beyond our central project area. So these are folks in the Dufferin Pocket, so neighborhoods that are just outside of Project Swallowtail's initial region, but still within the GTA. We've got folks in North York, in Scarborough, going a little bit further out. Etobicoke, which is just, slightly over to the west of us, which makes all the sense in the world. But then we've got folks in Belleville, in Prince Edward County, in Mississauga, in Brampton, who are all block ambassadors and are wanting to get involved and get their communities involved in habitat creation with Project Swallowtail. And we actually have a block ambassador in Vermont as well, which has been really fascinating because their pollinator groups are slightly different than ours. And though we overlap with a lot of native plants, it's just been a really interesting conversation with somebody in the US and the kinds of things that they have to deal with in terms of laws and regulations that we don't have, and vice versa. And once again, the hope is that these relationships that are created by people who are already living and engaged in these communities will lead to long-term sustainability of not just the project, but for the plants and the relationships that people develop with them. And so what is it that block ambassadors do? And, this is a question that we had a lot of block ambassadors ask us in their journey as BAs in this first year of Project Swallowtail, because really it's quite an open concept. Everybody can engage as much as they would like to into the project. And this varies. Folks can just be, ambassadors for Project Swallowtail by making their garden be, a highlight with native plants and pollinators, so that the community sees what's going on. We have block ambassadors that have done that. We've got block ambassadors who then have created small bits of habitat on boulevard gardens, like in this photo on the top left here. But then we've got block ambassadors also involved in community garden projects, food projects, and habitat creation in parks, which now start getting into dealing with city administration and bylaws, and so really the variety of engagement in habitat creation has really been quite diverse and quite incredible. And the same with community engagement, because we've had block ambassadors engage in a variety of ways. For the majority of the first year of Project Swallowtail, at least under Pollinator Partnership, we were not really sure how to get together, but we had persevering block ambassadors who made partnerships with farmers markets and other community organizations to get out there and have safe, distanced outdoor gatherings with folks. Plant swaps were another big way to engage both project members, but also others. And there were so many different ways that this engagement took place. The top left photo and the bottom photo are both plant giveaways in very different forms. And both are COVID safe and engaged the community in some kind of education of these plants. I really love this photo of the sign with seeds on it. This is actually a photo by one of my coworkers, Jordan, who coordinates the Bee City program. And he just saw this sign in his neighborhood and he was like, oh, look at this, it's so cool. And I just love it because you can get, it's rainproof and you can get some free milkweed seeds. So if somebody in the, if you're here, please raise your hand. So, because kudos to you. And we also had so many different art projects and signage that just invited people to take a moment and breathe and, you know, just appreciate what they were looking at, the pollinator garden or the plants specifically, or, you know, information about certain species. And beyond, we had block ambassadors who came and helped us with the plant sales, without whom we would not have been able to get close to 7,000 plants sold through those plant sales. We had block ambassadors who participated in other community events that didn't really have to do with Project Swallowtail, but tied in storytelling and native plants, like this event that took place at the Roncesvalles Peace Garden at Dundas and Roncesvalles. We've also got contributions in the form of incredible photos of pollinators because, you know, in the world of social media and of constantly needing content for our updating and expanding project, having you send in photos of pollinators in your gardens is really crucial. And even photos that we can use in community reports, like this one on the bottom here by Ali Lisk of one of our bike tours, which was a really fun time. So block ambassadors truly are as diverse in their engagement as they want to be. And that is what we encourage. But we are here as an organization and as a project to support you in this journey. And so that's enough from me. I would like to now pass things on to one of our incredible block ambassadors and kind of the main reason that Etobicoke is seeing a real boom in native plant interest for, you know, simmering away for the last maybe decade. But Douglas Counter is a native plant, in my mind at least, expert and garden lover. He's a graphic designer, he's a community engager, and he has actually got a garden that is part of the reason that we have a legal precedent for people to be able to fight for their native garden spaces as a right of artistic expression and expression of self. And that story in itself requires another session. And so I want to welcome Douglas and hand things off to you. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Junaid. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Hello. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Perhaps you could put on the first slide. Okay. Good evening, everyone. It's my honor to present tonight. As Junaid mentioned, I've been native plant gardening for quite a while. I've been native plant gardening for over 24 years in Etobicoke, which for those of you who aren't in Toronto, is the westernmost region of the city of Toronto. So it's a suburban community covered in lawns. And I started a native plant garden in 1997 as a memorial to my mother, and it has quite a history. So what you're seeing here tonight is a synopsis of my community outreach report, which I presented to Project Swallowtail in late October. So what you're seeing here on this slide is the cover of my report. And the two images that I've chosen, which were donated or shared with me and graciously shared with me by tour attendees, garden tour attendees, sum up my approach to community outreach, which was making use of the resource that I had on my own property, which is a native plant habitat garden with over 100 species of indigenous plants, sharing the knowledge I've gained through that with plant giveaways. So these two images, courtesy of Maggie and Catherine, thank you very much. And so this report, this presentation rather, is a synopsis of that report. Next slide. So first, I'd like to thank everyone who made this possible. Thank you first to the photographers who documented my outreach activities, gardens, and visiting pollinators so beautifully, and kindly granted me permission to use and credit their images in my community outreach report, of which this presentation is a synopsis. Ali Liska, Maggie Nouse, Catherine Taylor, Kathleen Law, Wayne Bannon, and a local community neighbor who wished to remain anonymous. Thank you also to Christina and Rohit Sharma, Brenda Morgan, and my local teacher neighbor for photos of where some of my propagated plants found homes. Thank you to Pete Ewens, Kit Rocha, Diane Goodwillie, Joanna Yakovsky, Kathleen Law, Junaid Khan, Lorraine Johnson, and Dan and Doina Plopino for your help and guidance and wheels when I needed them. Thank you also to all who attended one of my tours, who spread the word of my native plant giveaways locally, gave my propagated plants loving homes, supplied me with seed trays, signs, and postcards, donated pots, delivered donated soil, kindly gifted me a plant, or sought or offered advice, all while sharing with me their enthusiasm for pollinator gardening. Thank you all from the bottom of my heart for your huge contributions to my enjoyment of my community outreach activities, for the new friendships made, and for spreading the native plant love in my neighborhood and beyond. Next slide. So my community outreach approach, as I mentioned, took advantage of a resource that I have, and a long established native plant garden, and I combined that with plant giveaways and education. And just a bit of history, I joined Project Swallowtail in early 2021, so just this February, I believe, and began seed sitting in March when Pete Ewens kindly delivered seed trays and 6 species of seed, while I simultaneously collected any remaining overwintered seeds still left on plants in my own native gardens. And I was able to collect 5 species. A series of informative in-depth tours of my established native gardens at my home in central Etobicoke formed a vital part of my approach to distributing my propagated plant inventory and sharing my knowledge of native plant gardening with community members. And this is important because I wanted to use the plants that I was giving away as an education resource. So when requesting the 6 species of seed from Pete, I intentionally asked for species I already have growing in my gardens, so that on the tours, I was able to show attendees mature plants in a garden context for those species I was giving away. This allowed for practical discussions of the species I was offering. Now, I have a lot of squirrels and raccoons in my neighborhood, so I built this cage, 2-level structure, which I have on my driveway, or had on my driveway, to protect the seedlings I was growing from raccoons and squirrels. And at the bottom right, you'll see a list of a list of the species, the 11 species I was growing. So 2 of the species were supplied to me by Pete Ewens as seedlings, which I potted up. And I had 1 species of seed from both Pete and which I called moist stratified, and 1 from my own garden, which had naturally overwintered. So I could compare the germination rate of cold moist stratified versus overwintered seeds. So that was kind of interesting. Next slide, please. So the recipients of my propagated plants fell into 3 groups. First, attendees of my Project Swallowtail member garden tours. Second, attendees of my neighbors only garden tours. And third, local friends and neighbors I reached out to, as well as Etobicoke community members who learned of my native plant giveaways through a local Project Swallowtail member, Joanna Yakovsky, who had attended one of my member tours and kindly offered to promote my plants locally among her group contacts. These included local members of the Butterfly Way Project and local Girl Guide and Brownie leaders. And in order to promote my plants among these groups, I created this PDF, which you see here, which talks a little bit about the benefits of native plants for pollinators. And it lists the 9 species that I had on offer at the time. Some of my plants didn't mature enough by that time to give away. So these are the 9 species. I listed the light conditions for each species, the height range when mature, the blooming time, and mentioned a couple that are host plants for butterflies. And since we were in a pandemic, I ensured that all my communications had COVID protocols listed at the bottom. Masks would be required and social distancing would be practiced. And that was true for both my tours and for any plant giveaways, because I realized I'm representing Project Swallowtail and my neighbors are watching what I'm doing, because all of a sudden I have dozens and dozens of people showing up at my doorstep and what's going on. So I wanted to make sure that I was doing everything safely, and a lot of people commented on how they appreciated that that I followed the protocols. Next slide. So at the end of each garden tour, I just wanted to mention, if we go back to the slide previous. So in these 3 groups of people, I just wanted to mention that with the exception of just 2 recipients, all plants given to those in groups 2 and 3 went to private and community gardens in Etobicoke, which is my focus area for outreach. Next slide. So at the end of each garden tour, each attendee received a propagated plant of their choice, having benefited from seeing the same species as mature plants in my gardens and having had an opportunity to ask questions about them and consider suitability for their site. So it was really hands-on. I could say, this is what the plant looks like. I could describe how it behaves, its benefits, and then because a seedling looks very different than a mature plant, which might be 5 feet tall or even 10 feet tall when mature. And these are some of the beautiful photos that were supplied to me by attendees of my tours. The top 2 photos show my inventory. I didn't have enough space in my shelf unit, so I expanded my storage onto my boardwalk. And the bottom right photo sums up this whole process. It's about sharing, about giving to the community and giving to other gardeners. Next slide. So I hosted 7 tours for Project Swallowtail members and their guests with a combined attendance of 51 and shared 58 propagated plants with attendees. Now, the reason I gave 7 tours was because I was following COVID protocols. So I limited my attendance to 9 people per tour. Some people weren't able to make it. And these are some of the photos shared with me from the tours. The top right is my front tall grass prairie garden. Middle right is my woodland shade garden. The bottom right is my stormwater infiltration garden on the boulevard, as is the one at bottom left. And the middle photo on the bottom is my front garden right in front of my house. So at each tour, I'll just talk about what I talked about at the tours, because a big part of my tours was education. At each tour, I talked about my gardens as functioning habitat, my experiences over 24 years of native plant gardening, my inspirations, techniques employed, and the results, which have far exceeded my expectations. I also talked about the meaning of my gardens as sanctuary and as a memorial to my parents. My garden found its genesis as a memorial after my mom passed away. And I shared some of the magical experiences I've had in my gardens that have added so much richness to their meaning, such as the arrival of fireflies in Etobicoke. And I invited gardeners to give their own gardens a meaning that's personal to them. Because I found when I started having all these amazing experiences, it really enriched my appreciation of my garden and its meaning. So I encouraged others to do so as well. I talked about the purpose of my boulevard planting to mitigate and filter stormwater runoff, and raised awareness of the outcome of my court case that affirms one's right to grow a boulevard garden on city land. I shared maintenance and water conservation tips and how I overcame problematic site conditions. I highlighted specific plant species and their benefits to pollinators, for example, as host species, and talked about the diverse species of wildlife and pollinators that frequent my gardens. And these were species of insects and animals and birds that I had never had before when my garden was a lawn. So if you build it, they will come. And most importantly, I shared the joys and beauty of gardening for pollinators and was so pleased to answer gardeners' questions. Several guests at my 6 August tours expressed interest in returning to see the autumn blooming species, so I held an informal 3-hour drop-in event on September 26th, when I was able to demonstrate the importance of providing pollen and nectar sources into the autumn months, as there were lots of pollinators in my gardens that day. And it's been an immense pleasure to share my practical knowledge and experiences with fellow members and neighbors through my garden tours. Next slide. So there were plenty of pollinating insects at work during each of my garden tours, allowing attendees to see the benefits of native plants up close and to take these beautiful photos, which they kindly shared with me. The photo second from the left, the red one, that's actually on a tour attendee's jacket kit. But I just thought it was such a beautiful photograph, I included it. So the 4 photos on the left, the squarish photos, were taken on my very first Project Swallowtail member tour on August 1st. And the photo at right was taken at my September 26th autumn drop-in with a bee on New England aster. Next slide. So in order to generate interest in my immediate Etobicoke neighborhood and to meet neighbors I didn't know, I hosted 2 tours for neighbors with a combined attendance of 10 and shared 9 propagated plants with attendees. And I wasn't like, Etobicoke is a suburb of lawns, and I wasn't sure how to communicate to people out here. So I kept the language in my poster simple. I created this poster and printed it out on bright colored paper and posted 15 copies around a couple square kilometers of my neighborhood on my bicycle, because I don't drive, advertising my neighbor garden tours. So I referred to them as butterfly garden tours, and midway down the poster, it says gardening for butterflies, bees, and other important pollinators. Take home a free potted wildflower. So I refer to it as a wildflower rather than as a native plant, to appeal to a broad audience. And you may wonder, why did I take pictures of all these posters all around town? Well, I'm well acquainted with city bylaws, so I looked up the postering bylaw. And there are, of course, rules around postering. So one of them being that you have to put the date that you posted the poster, which I've got on the bottom left of my poster. And you're also required to remove posters within 5 days after your event. So I took the photos so I would remember where I put them. So immediately after my second or my second tour on the 22nd of August, I cycled around and removed all the posters. So there's a practical, so do your research because you don't want to fall afoul of the law. Next slide. So over the course of August and September, I reached out to several local friends and neighbors and was also contacted by local gardeners who had heard of my plant giveaways from local Project Swallowtail member Joanna Yakovsky. I gave each interested party a private tour. Now keep in mind, my tours lasted an hour to an hour and a half. The formal tours were sometimes 2.5 hours. So I was doing tours for most of August. So I gave each interested party a private tour when they came to pick up a site appropriate selection of plants for their home and or community gardens. In total, I gave 17 local and community neighbors a total of 334 plants. And yes, you heard that correctly. And donated an additional 28 plants to a local school garden and 54 plants to 2 Brownie and Girl Guide units for their local church gardens. And I'd just like to briefly talk about these images starting with the first one. So this is just a great story. So I met this neighbor, she's lived around the corner from me for 10 years, and I only just met her this year when I was out in my garden getting it ready for a garden tour. And this neighbor teaches at a local junior public school, and she expressed interest in having her grades 4 and 5 class plant a pollinator garden at their school. She picked up 28 plants, 1 for each student, and took them home in her wagon. As the planting date approached, she said to her class, "Sometimes we can feel powerless to help solve the world's environmental crisis. But there's something that we can do. We can plant a garden for pollinators." And that's exactly what we're going to do. And we're going to do it on Monday. The students held a planting event the following Monday on September 27th and planted those plants that I propagated. And it was just felt so great that I was reaching children because the children are our future. Shown in the middle photo, one of the recipients of some of my plants, Brenda, incorporated them into this lovely boulevard planting for her and her community to enjoy. And I'm particularly interested in boulevard gardens, having fought to protect mine and having won. So I was happy to share plants with Brenda for her boulevard. And shown at right, Christina and Rohit created this welcoming pollinator patch at the doorstep of their Etobicoke home using plants I had shared with them. So next slide. So this is a summary of, so one thing I did this year was I kept copious notes. When I was giving plants away to people, I made up a list of all the species I was offering. And when people requested plants, I curated a list of plants specific for their site. So I was able to, on this notepad, I printed these lists out as notepads, and I was able to mark the number of plants I was giving them. And that helped when I was putting their order together, that I could check them off on my list. And now I have a record of what species are where in my community. And when those people call me back next year and have questions about those species, I'll have a record of what I gave them. But keeping really detailed notes also allowed me to create this chart. So in terms of so I had different methods of outreach. So between my 7 formal Project Swallowtail member tours, my 2 neighbor tours, my individual plant giveaways, my giveaway to the class of 28 students, and my giveaway to a 16-member Brownie unit and a 22-member Girl Guide unit, my outreach reached or impacted 144 people. Now, I had no idea when I started this that I would be having that kind of an impact. I was worried that nobody in Etobicoke would be interested in native plants. So that was just like when I tallied up the numbers, I was floored. And in total, I gave away 483 plants I propagated. And this is the first time I propagated plants. My next on the chart is my plant inventory. In total, I potted up 608 native plants representing 11 species. I gave away 483. At the end of the season, I had some spindly little plants left over that were, some of them looked like they died, so I planted roots. hopefully they'll come up next year. And I had about 46 left over that appeared to have died in the pots. Now, what I learned from this experience this year is that the type of soil I purchased matters. I don't think the soil I bought had any nutrients in it. And so some of the plants I potted up at the end of the season just didn't do much. So in addition to propagated plants, there were also other plants that got in the ground this year. I shared 44 plant divisions for my own garden with gardeners, and I was the grateful recipient of potted plants and divisions that I received from tour attendees, 14. So the combined total number of plants in the ground in 2021 from all sources, 620. So I just hope those spread the word out there in the community. And I'm not sure exactly how many signups I had. Some people said they would. I gave them signs. I have confirmed 7 signups and 8 sign giveaways. One sign was for one person got 2 signs, one for their church garden and one for their home garden. And the final slide. So this image is the back cover of my report, and it sums up my approach to outreach, sharing plants and sharing the joy of gardening for pollinators. And I'd just like to close by sharing a lovely comment I received from Brenda, who attended one of my tours, member tours. She later returned to pick up plants for her Boulevard Garden project. And as we were parting, she said to me, "What you're really doing here is spreading love." Thank you, Brenda, and thank you to all who have shared their love of pollinator gardening with me through various outreach activities this year. And my full report will be available online. Sinead will post details in the chat. And I can't believe my phone is ringing. Thank you very much.
Oh, it's like that person knew exactly when Douglas would stop speaking. Well timed. Thank you, Douglas. That was incredible. Yep, sir. And as Douglas said, we will be sharing his report online. I'll share more details about that now once we wrap up. But I am extremely excited to now switch over from west to east and hand things off to our incredible block ambassador, Saye, who is an industrial design engineer, but has an incredible passion for education and has been working incredibly hard and passionately in both of those fields for over 20 years. And now she has a myriad of native plant related works. So without further ado, Saye, take it away.
Sinead, thank you so much for that introduction. I needed it after Douglas's amazing presentation. I was feeling like, what am I doing here? Douglas, absolutely, it was fantastic, so inspirational. I was one of the lucky ones who went to his garden tour, so I can say it is even better than what he said. It was fantastic. So you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Sherry? Excellent. So Douglas is going to be a hard act to follow, but I am going to try. So hello, everyone. My name is Saye, and I'm a block ambassador who's really trying to bring this amazing program to the East End of Toronto. So I'm a member of the Garden Club of Toronto, and I first learned about this project when my team received a Pollinator grant for a joint project we had with Metropolitan United Church to create their pollinator gardens that flank their entrance. And here you can see my fellow club members from Garden Club who work on this project. So when we first got the Pollinator grant, I had no idea of how many opportunities it created for us. And I know the deadline for this year's grant application is tomorrow, but I just want to encourage all of you who are applying to it to say that it is so much more than the funding. If you need to stay up late, complete your package, and good luck. I'll tell you a little bit about it. My team attended some really great online webinars that featured so many experts who shared their knowledge and wisdom. We had great access to advice and free plans, but the amazing part was 2 members, Liz, who I saw is here, and myself, we had a chance to go through the free pollinator stewardship training course from Project Swallowtail. And that is how we actually got to know about this amazing initiative. So our Metropolitan United Church Garden is now complete. And if you are in downtown at Queen and just east of Yonge, please stop by, take a look. We are very proud. And you know, the more that I learned about Project Swallowtail, the more that I found that it aligned with a lot of what I was doing in my own personal life as a hobby. I raise a lot of native plants from seed. They actually keep me sane during the winter months. I do a lot of cold, moist stratification, dedicated seed fridge, and I use every chance I get to hold workshops, engage people, spread the word, environmental stewardship. So in a way, it's like I've been secretly training to be a Project Swallowtail block ambassadors all this time. I just didn't know it. So one example of this was this native plant seed starting workshop I had in support of Dornis Doherty's really thought-provoking and insightful seed vault exhibit that she had at the Museum of Contemporary Art in 2019-2020. So you see, I was in training even then. So the workshop allowed people to learn about stratification and take home a sprouted seed, some soil, and a tiny pot so they could start making a difference in their own garden. Project Swallowtail put me in touch with 2 amazing like-minded block ambassadors from a little bit to the west of me in the Davisville area. Elitza and Angela and I were instant friends. So when Elitza said, hey, I'm starting this native plant garden bed in Thorncliffe Park, do you want to work on it? I said, of course. So I showed up, we started digging. Elitza and Angela had already picked up the Project Swallowtail seedlings, and by the end of the day, we created this fantastic little garden. You could immediately see the interest of the group of people that were tending to their own plots. And they stopped their work, they came over and started asking us about these varieties. And from what Elitza has told me, it's been thriving and people absolutely love it. And that's a common thing. When people see another gardener, they come over and talk and form new friendships. So I was working on another project when Mary Lou from the Leaside Lawn Bowling Club came over and asked me, you know, what are you doing? And that led to another opportunity for our trio to go in, remove invasives, and add native plants to their entry gardens. So I don't know if their members are here right now, but that's another awesome group of people. So every time I go by that way, I stop and take a look. It's nice to see, you know, when things like that happen. And as part of my educational outreach for completing my Pollinator Steward certification, I held a garden tour at my place at the beginning of August. Like Douglas, I put these little signs and advertised it locally. But I'd always had this goal of labeling the plants in my garden, partly because I forget sometimes when stuff is planted somewhere else. And so setting up the garden tour gave me a really strong deadline that I got to do it. About 10 to 12 people showed up, and I took them around and talked to them about how I'd taken out lawn and added plants. But one of the nicest parts of the tour was the plant giveaway. I set up a table, made some information cards about each of the varieties, and got my daughter to man the table. And it was a great chance for people to learn about new varieties that they could plant in their own gardens. Now, these plants were all donated by Project Swallowtail and came from the seedlings that members had all grown. So these are great ways of reaching other people and using those half of seedlings that are donated back to Project, are given back to Project Swallowtail. So I tried to make my garden tour sound interesting, and I was looking at different ways. So, and encouraging people to browse and look around and see signs and try to think about what they were seeing. So I had these signs that I hung onto my trees. And if any of you have read Doug Tallamy's work, you know that these represent the number of varieties of caterpillars that are supported by each tree species. So this was a great way to show, you know, even a humble crabapple can make a huge difference, and how these native trees can provide foods for baby birds. And another very successful educational tool that I made was these little larval host plant labels that I put next to plants around the garden. This one, for example, is a picture of the common buckeye butterfly and its caterpillar next to hoary vervain. And this was the way that I thought it would help and fill in the missing piece of information for a lot of people who they love butterflies, but they don't realize that those butterflies come from caterpillars with very specific needs and very specific plants they eat. So if you have plants that are being eaten by the right thing, like the butterfly for the caterpillar for the this butterfly, that's a good thing. So the one thing, however, is because I essentially just stole those pictures off the internet, I didn't have permission. Even though a lot of people were saying, oh, I would love to have labels like that, I couldn't really share them with anyone. So right now I'm reworking all the pictures to create original artwork that will be my own, and I can make freely accessible for anybody to print, laminate, use their own labels, but also make some line drawing versions that children can use to color. And so make it very child friendly. And of course, I leave the best for last, because this project is my personal favorite. Doug, we have this in common as well. We're both big on children and education. So the biggest personal project that I had this year was the Leaside High School Roundabout Garden. So I've sat on every school council ever. And so this was a project that at a school council meeting, Principal Grease asked, is there a parent who would be interested, would volunteer to beautify this roundabout garden in front of our school? And of course I heard the word garden. So I jumped at the opportunity and I said, I'll do it, as long as it's a native plant garden. And so the principal put me in touch with two wonderful teachers, Mr. Massey and Miss Osborne, who are the ones supervising the Leaside Eco Club. And we came up with a plan for the garden, as well as how the Eco Club would continue to be the stewards and maintain it. We use this, you'd love the name of it, lasagna method of cardboard mulching, where we use a layer of cardboard as a temporary mulch to suppress the invasive plants, put some soil over it, and it's a great barrier. And we use that to create the gardens, and we use a combination of landscape fabric covered with mulch for the pathways. Now, through the school's caretaking staff, we were able to get free soil and mulch from TDSB. And from May to October, it took about 90 volunteer hours to complete preparing the garden beds and pathways. And here's our plan for the planting the varieties that I have to say most were donated by Project Swallowtail again. And some were donated by my friends and some by myself. So our planting day was on October 18th, and about 30 members of the Eco Club came out and they planted 38 varieties of 128 plants. So it's like that is impressive. It's like a little mini botanical garden. These are all drought tolerant, and it was so beautiful to see how passionate these children were, genuine interest, and how engaged the staff was. So here's a group picture of the team that pulled it off, but I must add the one person that's not in the picture and should be is Ms. Osborne, who was taking the picture, and she's one of the 2 teachers leading, supervising that Eco Club. So this is what the garden looks like now. And we have little flags and caution tape to mark the pathways. And I know that by now, a lot of people are excited at the opportunity of engaging with schools and are brimming with energy about creating new gardens, but I want to add a word of caution. So over the course of working in this garden, I got to know a little bit about the history of it over the past few years. There are things that have been planted at different times, and it's even been a native plant garden at one time. But the truth is, children graduate. Enthusiastic parents move on, and overworked teachers and principals are bogged down with more work and less time. And of course, public school funding is constantly getting cut. That's the one constant there. So unless you truly engage and understand the needs and capabilities of the school, and you do the best to ensure long-term success, so after you are gone or after there's a staff change, this will still continue. It's not going to lead to lasting results. You have to make sure it has a life of its own that will continue long after you're no longer part of the project. So luckily for me, the Leaside Roundabout Garden has a dedicated principal right now and 2 amazing teachers, as well as a really extremely motivated Eco Club, which has taken ownership of this project. Now, on planting day, I could sense their eagerness. So just last week, I went in and I gave them a presentation. I even managed to, if you see on the table over here, I see my cursor perhaps. This is it's like a 2-meter stalk of cup plant that I cut and I took in for them because they have cup plants in their garden. And it was just awesome for them to see how amazing this plant will look in a couple of years. And I took some switchgrass and milkweed pods and things like that. And it was great for them to see this and also have slides of the wildlife that they would expect to see in their own school in spring. And another thing I have to tell you is I'm delighted that Leaside High School Eco Club has signed up to be a seed sitter group. And I'm going to be making special kits for them with the teachers, and let's see how it works out. But that is a very impressive group right there. And so you may wonder what my next steps are as block ambassador. I'm going to start with my command center for the thousands of seedlings I aim to produce. So I just finished this shelf. I have to say my husband and I finished this shelf just last week, and it is ready for our industrial scale seed sitting operation. But right now I'm going to be working with around 100 people and in different seed sitting groups that I'm trying to bring into the program. The first one is my local Underhill group, and I saw a couple of you as participants. I'll give you all a big shout out. Thank you very much for coming. And it stands at around 30 people right now. These are people that I contacted by making a post on Nextdoor, as well as my local Buy Nothing Facebook group. I figured those are the people most interested in, helping the environment, and it worked. As well as neighbors that I met through garden tours, and anybody who at any point in their life showed the tiniest bit of interest in native plants. Then there's the Leaside High School's Eco Club with another 30 to 40 members. I'll see the final numbers. And I know Linda's here, so I'm going to say another seat sitting group that came out from a chance encounter was with a neighbor. I was giving a tiny bit of rhubarb roots to, and that has led to a great friendship with Linda and getting to know the amazing folks at St. Clair Evangelical Missionary Church. So about 10 members from that church have formed their own seat sitting group. And I'm going to be presenting to them on November 27th. And of course, this would not be complete with my amazing home base of fellow gardeners at the Garden Club of Toronto, that I am just about to launch that group as well. These fellow gardeners are fantastic, they're passionate, and we even know what community project we're going to be growing for. We are going to be growing seedlings to be used at the Wilkett Creek Ravine Restoration Project in celebration of the club's 75th anniversary. So we're sourcing specific native seeds for that. And if it's any marker, I know that each of these groups will lead to new friendships and amazing projects all around Toronto. Thank you very much.
Oh my goodness. Saye, come on. You can't talk about Douglas's presentation and be so humble in the face of the amount of plants you're going to bring in to Project Swallowtail, just through the sheer amount of conversations and connections and students. We can get students growing plants. Yes. I'll invite Douglas to turn your video on if you're able to. And thank you everybody who's here. I have realized that unfortunately, the back end of the Zoom meeting disabled the chat function for webinars, and I apologize. This account is used by Pollinator Partnership Canada staff across the board, so please use the Q&A function. I see that a bunch of you already have, with a lot of love in there. Thank you. And there are also a couple of questions in here. So the first one's from Pete for you, Douglas. On the poster, how did you let people know how to contact you in order to book a slot in advance, given the restricted numbers in the pandemic?
That's a great question. And thank you, Saya, for your amazing and inspiring presentation. Just amazing. It was nice to see so many people in your pictures. I didn't get any pictures of my neighbor tours. That's a good question, Pete. And I didn't include limits on the numbers, but I just hoped for the best. I thought I would just wing it, and when people showed up, I would just kind of separate them into groups. Luckily, I had 10 people in total over the course of 2 tours, so I didn't have to worry about numbers. But I did insist that everyone wear a mask on the poster and for the Project Swallowtail member tours, and everybody complied, which is great. And I should also note that my garden, my property is basically 95% habitat. So there's not much room for people in my garden. It's designed for wildlife, not for people. So I had to limit the numbers because of the physical restrictions of my space. So in terms of people coming to that neighbor-only tour, I just lucked out. And I thought, well, I'll just deal with it if it happens, because what else could I do? I also didn't really feel like I wanted to put my email address or phone number on a public poster on all the posts in town, or around my neighborhood. So I kind of just winged it and was lucky.
Most of the other questions are just compliments. Brilliant idea for Saye for the inclusion of caterpillar and butterflies to really kind of get the point across that you might love this final end product of this beautiful, colorful animal, but it requires this overwintering specific need, and then also the food for the caterpillar. Mary says, wonderful to both speakers. Pete says, fantastic work, Saye. So amazing and inspiring. Saye, you're a wonder. Douglas, this is incredible. This is going on and on. So thank you so much for sharing your stories. And I really want to highlight that being a Block ambassador is all about your passion, whatever it is that you are interested in doing. Saye is incredibly passionate about education, and we're trying to do whatever we can to help her in this partnership with the Leaside Public School. Douglas is an incredible storyteller and has more of a garden tour in-person engagement with folks through the story of his incredible garden. And so really the kind of engagement that you seek can be very personalized to yourself. And please reach out to us if you've got ideas. You want to do art with people with native plant stocks or something? Yeah, let's talk about it. We're here to help you however you want. Thank you for attending tonight. Thank you to Douglas and Saye once again for sharing. So thanks everybody. Have yourselves a great night.
Thanks,
See ya.
Junaid. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Douglas.
Thanks. Bye.